To my beloved wife, Veronica, I leave the house, the savings, the business shares, and all remaining assets. Silence. Mr. Kendall cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, pretending not to notice the way I blinked, just once. So slowly it felt like time paused. That concludes the reading of Mr. Raymond James' last will and testament.
My mouth was dry.
No mention of me. Not a cent. Not a word. Veronica placed a hand on her chest, whispered, "He just wanted to protect me, Alyssa. I'm sure he meant to include you somehow." I nodded. I didn't speak. I couldn't. But I did reach into my purse and curl my fingers around a cream-colored envelope. The one I'd found tucked inside an old jacket in his study, hidden, sealed, and addressed in his handwriting. It wasn't over.
Not yet.
I used to believe my dad and I were close. Not the storybook close, like Sunday pancakes and fishing trips, but our own quiet rhythm. He was a man of few words, and I was a child who didn't demand much. I learned early to read his silences. My parents divorced when I was 6. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen, face turned to the wall like she didn't want me to see. She never said why it ended, only that your father's loyalty has a price tag.
I didn't understand that then.
I do now. After the divorce, I saw him every other weekend, but sometimes that turned into once a month, then once every 2. Still, I waited. I packed my little pink suitcase and stood by the window, like clockwork. Some weekends he showed. Some he didn't. But when he did, I lit up. When I was 9, he brought Veronica around. She was tall, blonde, loud. She wore stilettos to the movies and smelled like perfume counters at department stores. She called me sweetheart in a syrupy voice that never matched her eyes. I remember one dinner when she laughed a little too hard at something I said, then turned to Dad and said, "She's adorable. I mean, rough around the edges, but we can work on that."
We. As if I was a project. Dad didn't say anything, just kept eating.
That night, I cried into the couch pillow while reruns of Full House played behind me. He told me to be nicer, that Veronica just wanted to connect. She never tried to connect. She tried to control. By the time I turned 12, our visits were no longer just me and Dad. They became family time, which meant Veronica picked the restaurant, Veronica chose the vacation plans, and Veronica spoke for both of them. And slowly it worked. She remodeled not just his house, but him. Dad stopped calling me champ. Stopped sending birthday letters like he used to. Instead, I got forwarded texts, short messages like, "From Dad. Happy birthday, Alyssa. Hope you're well. Hope you're well." At 15, I won a regional science competition. I was the only black girl in the top 10 finalists. My mom cried when I walked off stage, hugging me like I just landed on the moon. I looked for Dad in the crowd. He wasn't there. He sent a gift card through the mail, Veronica's handwriting on the envelope. "You're so smart," the card read. "College will be easy for you. R&V. R&V. Not Dad. Not even his words. I tried. I really did. Every Christmas, I showed up with a gift. Every Father's Day, I sent a card. Even when I felt like I didn't belong in that house anymore. She had remodeled everything, right down to the fireplace mantel, replacing all the old photos with sleek black and whites of them vacationing in Hawaii, Paris, Napa Valley. There was one picture of me, stuck to the side of the fridge with a magnet. I was about 10 in that photo. My smile too big, my eyes still believing. The first time I brought it up to Dad, he said, "She has a better eye for design." The second time, he said, "It's just a picture, baby." The third time, he didn't respond at all. By college, I stopped going over as often. It hurt too much. But I never let go completely. I still texted. I still called. I even visited him in the hospital last year, when he had that minor stroke. Veronica posted online like she was the sole caregiver, the brave wife who never left his side. But I was the one who stayed 2 nights in the waiting room when he was unconscious. I held his hand. I whispered, "Please, Dad, stay." I wiped the drool from the corner of his mouth. I helped the nurse change the sheets. Veronica came in with Starbucks and selfies. "Smile, Ray. For the healing journey post. He smiled. For her. After he was discharged, he didn't thank me. He said, Veronica told me you were helpful. That was all. And yet, I still loved him. I still wanted to believe there was a version of him who remembered the first time I lost a tooth, who taught me how to pump gas, who once promised me, you'll always be my little girl. The last conversation we had, he called me out of the blue. It was short. He sounded tired. You okay? I asked. Yeah, I just wanted to hear your voice. Dad, are you sure everything's all right? Long pause. If anything ever happens to me, look in the old cigar box. You know the one. Okay. What? Just don't forget, I love you. No matter what. He hung up. A week later, he was gone. Veronica planned everything. The memorial. The burial. The catering. I was barely involved. I gave a eulogy. Choked my way through it while she dabbed at imaginary tears. Then came the reading of the will. No mention of me. No thank you. No goodbye. But that cigar box? I remembered. It was still tucked in the corner drawer of his office, hidden behind files labeled insurance and investments. Veronica hadn't cleaned out his study yet. Maybe she didn't know it existed. I found the box 2 nights after the funeral. I had stopped by under the pretense of picking up a few photo albums. She had wine with her friends on the patio and didn't even notice I was there. Inside the box were old birthday cards I'd given him, 2 faded photographs of us at the beach, and an envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed.
Addressed to
Alyssa, if something happens. My hands shook when I touched it. I slipped it into my purse. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. I sat with it for 3 days, holding it like it might catch fire if I moved wrong. I stared at his handwriting until I knew every curve, every tilt. And then, on a quiet Sunday morning with the sunlight barely slipping through my blinds, I peeled it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a document. Notarized. Dated 4 months ago. A draft of a new will. One that left the house to me. The business shares to a foundation in my mother's name. Personal assets divided with clear reasoning. And, at the end, in his careful handwriting, Veronica and I argued about this. She'll fight it. But this is my true wish. I trust you, baby girl. Do what's right. My chest felt like it cracked open. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, holding proof that I wasn't crazy, that he had loved me, that I had mattered, even if he hadn't lived long enough to sign it formally, even if the system wouldn't honor it, even if Veronica burned it in a fireplace. I had the truth now, and I wasn't letting it go. 3 days after I opened the envelope, I drove to Uncle Marvin's house. He was Dad's older brother, a man who wore suspenders without irony and always smelled faintly of motor oil and cinnamon gum. He opened the door with tired eyes. I figured you'd come. I stepped inside, and before he could offer me tea or whiskey or grief-sharing platitudes, I handed him the document. He read in silence. His brows lifted slightly. Then he folded it back with a sigh. You know this doesn't change anything legally, right? I know, I said, staring at the carpet. But it changes everything else. He nodded.
Yes,
it does. I thought maybe he'd help. Maybe he'd say, let me talk to Kendall. Let me speak to Veronica. But instead, he patted my arm and said, sometimes letting go is more powerful than holding on. And just like that, the first door closed. I tried again. I reached out to the family lawyer, Mr. Kendall. I asked for a second meeting. He responded with a short email. Alyssa, your father's will, as executed, is binding. I'm afraid revisiting it would not only be inadvisable, it may cause unnecessary distress to the family. I hope you find peace during this difficult time. Peter Kendall. Distress to the family? What about the distress of being erased? I stared at his email, rereading that line until the words blurred. I even called my cousin Tasha. We were never super close, but we shared enough childhood Thanksgivings that I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd understand. I just need someone to hear me, I said over the phone. This document, he wrote it.
he meant it.
He just didn't live long enough to. Girl, she sighed. I mean, I hear you. But maybe this is God's way of saying let it be. I don't want to see you spiral. I'm not spiraling. I'm waking up. Okay, but just be careful. Veronica's got money, lawyers, influence. You don't want to look crazy. There it was. You don't want to look crazy. Even grief, even truth, is made to feel like madness when it challenges what others want to believe. A week passed. Then another. Veronica hadn't reached out. I wasn't surprised. But when I showed up at the house to pick up the last of my dad's personal belongings, things she said I could take, something had changed. The box I'd left labeled Dad's Books was gone. So was the lamp from his study, the record player, even the tie I bought him for his birthday. I rang the bell. She opened it with her usual performative smile. Alyssa, you didn't call. You said I could pick up my things this week. I did, yes. But then I thought maybe it's better if we just keep things clean. You know. Clean? I donated the box. You seemed like you were moving on, and it felt appropriate. I stared at her. That syrupy tone. That fake empathy curling under every word. I see. It's not personal. Right. I think you're a lovely girl, Alyssa. But grief does strange things. And sometimes, well, it's best to let go before it consumes you. She smiled, as if that sentence had helped me somehow. I turned to go. She called after me. I'll let you know when the trust is finalized. I believe there's a small amount set aside for extended family. I didn't turn back, but I heard her voice one last time as I reached my car. Oh, and just a heads up. If you go around sharing fake documents, you could get into serious trouble. For your sake, don't embarrass yourself. That was it. The warning. The control. And in that moment, something inside me flipped. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn love that was conditional, respect that was rationed, and space that was borrowed. But the moment she questioned my truth, when she called my father's handwriting fake, I felt something new. Resolve. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I felt hollow. But not in a hopeless way. In a clear, sharp, final way. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the document again. It didn't matter what they said. It didn't matter what the court said. It mattered that I knew. He wrote it. For me. He wanted me to have the house. He wanted to honor my mother. He knew Veronica wouldn't support it. That's why he hid it. That's why he told me about the box. I remembered something he used to say when I was little, when I'd ask too many questions during a movie. Sure, he'd whisper. Just wait. The truth always shows up late, but it never lies. The truth was here now. And maybe it was late, but it wasn't going anywhere. I stopped talking about it. I stopped emailing people. I stopped explaining. My silence wasn't surrender. It was a signal that something had shifted, that I didn't need to be believed to be right. Veronica could live in that house. She could throw parties and post her husband's favorite recipes on Facebook. But every wall, every photo, every memory, they weren't hers. They were borrowed. And the truth? It belonged to me now. The first thing I did was mute every family thread on my phone. Then I deleted the numbers. Not just Veronica's, everyone's. Uncle Marvin, Cousin Tasha, even Mr. Kendall, the estate lawyer. I saved screenshots of their last messages just in case, but the numbers themselves? Gone. It wasn't out of anger. It wasn't spite. It was air. It was the breath I'd been holding since the day I was left out of my own father's will. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something I didn't expect. Relief. I stopped trying to make people understand. I stopped emailing lawyers. I stopped waiting for someone to say, "You were right." The document stayed in my drawer. Not buried. Not displayed. Just placed. Where it belonged. Where he wanted it to be. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove. I just needed to live. My first act of defiance was unbelievably small. I canceled the annual flower delivery I used to send to Veronica on Dad's birthday. Every year, even after the distance grew between us, I sent a bouquet. Always white lilies. Always with a note that read, "For loving him." This year, I clicked cancel. No explanation. No apology. Just canceled. It felt like power. Next, I withdrew from the group that organized my father's scholarship fund. It was something he set up years ago with his fraternity brothers, small donations to help local students buy textbooks and supplies. After he passed, they asked me to co-manage it. I initially agreed, thinking it would be a way to stay connected to his legacy. But after everything, after being erased, I realized I didn't want to carry pieces of his life that weren't really mine to hold. So I wrote a short email. Dear board, thank you for allowing me to serve these past few months. I'm stepping away to focus on personal healing. Best of luck continuing his mission. Alyssa James. No drama. No side notes. Just detachment. And with every step, I felt something loosen in my chest. Veronica tried to bait me once. She posted a picture of her and Dad in front of the fireplace on Facebook. Captioned it, "Missing Ray every day. He always said, family is everything, broken heart." I almost replied. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. But I didn't. Instead, I hit unfollow. Then, I deleted my entire Facebook account. It wasn't my world anymore. None of them were. I started walking. Every morning, I'd throw on an old hoodie, loop around the neighborhood, and just walk. No phone. No music. Just me and my thoughts and the sound of my own breath. At first, those walks were heavy. I'd replay conversations in my head. Veronica's words. It's not personal. Kendall's email. Unnecessary distress. Tasha's warning. Don't make yourself look crazy. But eventually, those voices got quieter. Eventually, they disappeared altogether. And one morning, as the sun broke through a thick gray sky, I realized something. They weren't the soundtrack anymore.
I was.
My apartment slowly changed too. I took down every picture of me and Dad that made me feel like I was still trying. I replaced them with images of me. Alone.
Happy.
Hiking.
Painting.
Laughing with friends. I got rid of the old recliner he gave me from his office. One of the last things I still held on to because it smelled like him. It didn't smell like him anymore. It smelled like regret. I donated it. Without ceremony. Without pain. One night, I pulled out the document again. For the first time, I wasn't looking at it for answers. I wasn't trying to decode the words or trace the loops in his handwriting. I just looked, and I whispered, "Thank you." Not because he got it all right, not because it fixed everything, but because, in his own flawed way, he tried.
He saw me.
Even if no one else did. And that was enough. I changed my phone number the following week. I didn't tell anyone. Not even the handful of distant relatives who'd sent me half-hearted condolence texts or tagged me in family group photos. I was done with performative connections. If someone really needed me, they'd find a way. But I wouldn't stay reachable just to feel less alone. I wasn't alone anymore. I had myself. I stopped explaining the document. Stopped bringing it up. Stopped hoping anyone would knock on my door and say, "We're sorry. We were wrong." Because here's the truth. Some apologies never come. And some closure you have to create yourself. I built mine, word by word. Boundary by boundary. Silence by silence. 6 weeks after I vanished from the family radar, I got an email from a local nonprofit. Someone had anonymously donated $15,000 to a literacy program under my name. There was a short note attached. For the daughter of Raymond James, who taught her to read between the lines. I smiled. I didn't investigate. Sometimes peace comes when you stop needing to know everything. Sometimes it just arrives.
And you let it in.
My therapist asked me once, "What would justice look like to you?" And for the first time, I didn't say, "I want the house," or "I want people to know the truth." I said, "Justice looks like freedom from the people who made me feel invisible." She smiled. "And are you there yet?" I thought about the silence in my apartment, about the walks, about the document tucked away, unneeded but real. And I said, "I'm getting close." I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their guilt. I didn't even need their love. I just needed the sound of my own peace. And every day, it got louder. I walked into Kendall's office with the envelope in one hand and my father's old pocket watch in the other. I hadn't planned to bring it. It had been in the top drawer of his nightstand for years, but somehow it felt like a compass that would guide me through the storm. Mr. Kendall looked up from a stack of documents, startled. Alyssa, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. I dropped the envelope on his desk. Then I hope this is a surprise worth your time. He raised a brow, sliding the paper out of its casing. As he unfolded it, the tension in his jaw shifted. I watched the color drain from his cheeks. Where did you get this? Dad's old corduroy jacket. The tan one he wore in the garden. This was sewn into the lining. Kendall pressed his glasses higher on his nose and began to read. His voice, usually steady and practiced, trembled as he whispered aloud pieces of the letter. If anything happens to me, and this isn't the will that gets presented, look deeper. He looked up, eyes wide. This changes everything. I nodded once. That's the original will, isn't it? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood and walked to the filing cabinet, pulling out a yellowed folder labeled RJ, Personal Prelim Will. Inside was a notarized document dated just 6 months before Dad's death. The same language, the same assets. But this one told a different story. To my daughter, Alyssa James, I leave the primary residence and 51% of James Landscaping Company, with the remainder going to my wife, Veronica. Kendall stared at the pages. This was superseded by the version Veronica submitted, the one we read at the will hearing. But if this one was hidden deliberately, there's a serious question of manipulation. She convinced him to sign another one, probably when he was already sick, confused. Kendall tapped the signature at the bottom of the will. This original version is properly notarized. I recognize the witness signatures. My breath caught. Then what does that mean legally? It means that if we can prove the final will was signed under undue influence, this document could override it. Especially if we prove he was not of sound mind when he made the changes. My pulse was racing now. And Veronica? She'll fight it. She'll claim this one was revoked. But if a court agrees with your evidence, she could lose everything. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about dignity, legacy. My dad trust to her. And she betrayed that trust in the end. I clutched the pocket watch in my palm and headed for the door. You'll need to prepare yourself, Kendall warned. This won't be easy. I turned back. Neither was hearing my name left out of his will. The confrontation happened 2 days later at the estate. Veronica was lounging in the sunroom, wearing silk and sipping wine, as if she hadn't just inherited an empire. I assume you're here to apologize for your behavior, she said without looking up. No, I said, setting the envelope on the table. I'm here to give you a chance to walk away before this gets ugly. She scoffed, finally giving me her full attention. What is that? Dad's real will. The one you didn't want anyone to see. She stood slowly, color rising in her cheeks. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. And Mr. Kendall agrees. This will predates the one you filed. And it's notarized. I've already spoken to a probate attorney. You tried to erase me, Veronica. But my dad didn't. Veronica stepped forward, her eyes sharp now, her voice lower. You think this makes you powerful? No, I replied. It makes me my father's daughter. And unlike you, I have nothing to hide. The morning sun had barely crested the hills when I parked outside Mr. Kendall's office again. This time, I didn't ask for an appointment. I just walked in, clutched the envelope tightly, and dropped it on his mahogany desk. I need you to look at this. Now. He took one look at the envelope, immediately recognizing my father's handwriting, and nodded solemnly. Where did you find this? Behind a false drawer in his old study cabinet. He must have hidden it there before I stopped. The word died, still felt like broken glass on my tongue. He slid on his glasses, opened the seal carefully, and began to read. His brow furrowed, then rose, then dropped again. And when he finally looked back up at me, his expression had changed entirely. This changes everything. I leaned forward. Tell me. It's a codicil. A handwritten amendment to the original will. It's valid, especially with his signature and the date. Look, your father wrote this 2 weeks before he passed. It overrides parts of the original document. My hands shook. Overrides what exactly? Mr. Kendall read aloud. In light of recent clarity and reflection, I wish to ensure that my daughter Alyssa is properly provided for. To her, I leave half the proceeds of the business, the Woodland property in Vermont, and the contents of the safety deposit box at Glendale Bank. Veronica is aware of this and has agreed. I gasped. She knew. He nodded slowly. He clearly says she was aware. The room spun slightly. My father hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd planned to make things right. And Veronica, she'd known. She had known about this document and sat there at that will reading, pretending like she was just as surprised as me. Tears welled up, but they weren't just from pain this time. There was something else beneath it. Vindication. I'd spent weeks questioning my father's love, wondering if I'd imagined the closeness we shared during his last months. But he had remembered me,
Protected me.
fought for me. And now I had proof. I'll begin proceedings immediately, Mr. Kendall said, his voice gentler than before. But you need to be prepared. This is going to be messy. Veronica will fight this. She can try, I whispered. I stepped out of his office, letting the sunlight warm my face. All those nights replayed in my mind. Her cold glances, her smug silence at the will reading, her fake concern. It all made sense now. She hadn't just lied. She had stolen. But I was done being quiet. Dad had left me the keys. Now it was time to open every locked door. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I drove straight to the estate, pulled into the circular driveway, and walked up the steps like I owned them because part of me did now. Veronica opened the door in a silk robe, a mug of tea in her hand, and a smirk on her face. Oh, look, she said with that same thinly veiled condescension. The prodigal daughter returns. What is it now, Alyssa? More accusations? More digging in the past like some grave robber? I held up a copy of the codicil. Her eyes twitched. Oh, I said, stepping inside without asking. You seem a little pale. Recognize this? She shut the door behind me with force. That's not. Where did you get that? In Dad's study. False drawer. Funny how you never mentioned it at the will reading, even though he clearly states you knew about it. Her voice lost its chill. You don't know what you're talking about. That was a draft. It wasn't filed. He was confused. He wasn't confused, Veronica. He was finally clear. And he trusted me enough to leave that document somewhere he knew I'd eventually find it. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain control. So what? You think you're going to swoop in and undo everything? Lawyers won't touch that. It's a scrap of paper. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Mr. Kendall has already verified it. It's legally binding. My father's signature is clear. The date is 2 weeks before his death, and the codicil trumps the earlier will. You knew it. You hid it. She went silent. The quiet between us was deafening. Why? I asked. Why did you do this? Something cracked in her face then. Her lip trembled, and her eyes flashed with something like fury or maybe fear. Because you don't deserve it, she hissed. You left him alone for years. I was there, I took care of him. I watched him decay. You came in at the last minute and played the perfect daughter. My voice stayed level. And he still chose to leave that document behind. That tells me everything. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked small. You're not going to win, she muttered. I already did, I replied, stepping back toward the door. Because, unlike you, I don't need to manipulate or steal to be seen. My father saw me. And now, so will everyone else. I walked out with the air cracked open behind me, her silence chasing me to the car. There was still a long road ahead. Legal processes, claims, challenges. But the confrontation was done. The storm had landed. And the truth, my truth, was out in the open. The legal wheels didn't turn fast, but they turned. Mr. Kendall filed the necessary paperwork within days of verifying the codicil. I braced myself for a drawn-out legal battle, but Veronica's confidence collapsed faster than I expected. Maybe it was because the handwriting matched perfectly. Maybe it was the lawyer's signature, notarized and indisputable. Or maybe she knew she was running on fumes. She didn't even try to contest it. Within weeks, the probate court accepted the codicil as valid. The assets were reassessed, and the original will was overturned. The estate was to be split equally, just as my dad had written. Not out of spite, not out of guilt, but fairness. Standing in court the day the judgment was read, I felt a strange mix of peace and mourning. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came in quiet acknowledgement. A nod from the judge. A firm handshake from Mr. Kendall. A glare from Veronica that said everything and nothing at once. Afterward, I walked the property again, the one I had been shut out of. I stepped through the garden where my dad used to drink his morning coffee. I stood in the office where I'd found the document. And I looked out over the land he loved. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like return. But I didn't want to keep it all. I sold the estate. Every brick of it. Not to be petty, but because I needed a clean start. With my half of the inheritance, I set up a foundation in my father's name. A scholarship program for underprivileged students pursuing architecture, his lifelong passion. The rest, I invested in a modest home of my own, miles away from the weight of secrets and cold marble floors. I built something simple.
Mine.
Veronica, from what I heard, moved into a condo in Florida. We never spoke again. I didn't need to hear from her. The silence between us had already told me everything. There was no public drama. No headlines. Just the slow turning of tides. I had thought the will had the final word. But my father had written one last sentence. And I found it. Some nights, I still hear his voice. Not in a ghostly way. Not in some echo off the garden walls. But in memory, soft, steady, threaded into the places where grief and love now quietly coexist. Grief is strange. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it just lingers, sits in the room with you, uninvited but familiar. After the dust of the legal chaos settled, I expected a wave of triumph, vindication. But what came instead was reflection, the kind that humbles you. I realized that what I had been fighting for wasn't really the money, or even the estate. It was acknowledgement, the silent affirmation that I mattered to him, even when he couldn't always say it. That codicil wasn't just a legal document. It was a final whisper from a man who struggled to express love with words but carved it into actions. Maybe he didn't tell me every day that he was proud. But in that envelope, in that ink, he left me proof. He saw me, and he made it right. I used to think closure came when the conflict ended. But really, it begins when you decide to let go, not of the past, but of the need to rewrite it. I stopped replaying the final months of his life, the phone calls I wish I'd answered, the silence between us that sometimes felt like an ocean. I stopped wondering why he waited so long to fix it. Instead, I focused on what he did do. He wrote my name. He shared what was his. He honored me, even if he wasn't around to see it happen. Healing didn't come in one wave. It arrived in pieces, in mornings where I didn't wake up angry, in afternoons spent drawing up scholarship applications, in quiet evenings when I walked my new neighborhood and imagined him smiling, finally proud of the life I'd built. There's a saying I once read, "Forgiveness is the scent the rose leaves on the heel that crushes it." I forgave him. And maybe, in some small way, I forgave myself too. For the years lost. The words unspoken. The pain carried too long. Now, when I think of him, I don't just think of the will. I think of the time we built a treehouse together. I think of the late-night talks when he told me stories of his college days. I think of how he always kept spare change in the car console for tolls, even if he never remembered to carry his wallet. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. And in the end, he came back to me, not with fanfare, but with a folded piece of paper that said, "I didn't forget you." 6 months after the court closed the case, I got a call from a man I'd never heard of, Jonathan Crenshaw, a private estate consultant based in Vermont. "I believe we need to discuss your father's secondary trust," he said calmly. My heart skipped. Secondary trust? Turns out, my dad had one final move. Hidden beneath a shell company in Maine, there was a trust my father had created 3 years before he passed, one not even Margaret knew about. And in it, he named me as the sole beneficiary. It wasn't massive, no yachts or mansions, but it was enough. Enough to secure my future, start the scholarship fund, and even launch a small publishing imprint I'd dreamed of since college. The funny part? The trust had only one restriction. For dreams only, it read. Not survival. That was Dad. Always a man of few words, but somehow always intentional when it mattered most. Margaret tried to contest it, of course. But this time, the paper trail was bulletproof. Not even her expensive team of sharks could poke a hole through it. The judge signed off without hesitation. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun felt different. Warmer, like something had shifted. I smiled. Not at the victory, but at the irony. My dad, the man who once said I should grow up and be realistic, had left me funds earmarked specifically for unrealistic dreams. And maybe that was his final gift. Not just the money, not just the acknowledgement, but the freedom to live beyond survival. To become.
To bloom.